You know someone like this. Successful. Respected. Everyone assumes they've got it all figured out. Then one day, they walk away. No breakdown. No dramatic scene. Just a decision. And they never look back. Most people who quit something big spend months explaining themselves afterward. This person doesn't. And it isn't impulsive. It's the opposite. Psychology has a specific explanation for why the most accomplished people are often the ones who disappear the cleanest and never turn around. It usually looks sudden from the outside. The partner who leaves the firm they spent a decade building. The executive who resigns at the top of their game. The athlete who retires while they are still winning every match. Nobody around them saw it coming, because nobody around them was watching the internal process. The visible signs, if you knew to look for them, were small. Fewer questions asked in meetings that used to energize them. A slight delay before saying yes to things they once said yes to instantly. None of it registered as anything, because on paper, everything still looked exactly the same. The decision wasn't made in that final moment. It was made months, sometimes years earlier, and simply carried out on this particular day, in front of an audience who thought they knew this person completely. Psychologists Ken and Sheldon and Andrew Elliott studied something they called self-concordance, the degree to which a goal genuinely reflects a person's own values, instead of pressure absorbed from parents, peers, or status. Their research found people can achieve enormous success on a goal that was never fully theirs to begin with. The applause is real. The title is real. But the achievement sits on a foundation that was never self-chosen, and eventually that mismatch becomes impossible to keep ignoring, no matter how well the outside looks. For most people, this mismatch produces years of quiet dissatisfaction they never act on. For high achievers, something different happens. The same drive that built the career now turns against it. They apply their full analytical capacity to the gap between the life they built and the life they actually want. And once that gap is named clearly, in precise, honest terms, it doesn't shrink back down. It grows sharper every single day it's tolerated. This is where Harvard psychologist Tal Ben-Shahar's concept of the Arrival Fallacy becomes relevant. Ben-Shahar coined the term after noticing that reaching a long-chased goal rarely produces the lasting satisfaction people expect it to. High achievers hit the milestone, feel a brief lift, and then watch the emptiness return almost immediately afterward. Most people respond to that by chasing the next milestone, assuming the last one just wasn't big enough. Some stop and ask a much harder question instead. What if the next one won't work either, and never has? Leon Festinger's research on cognitive dissonance explains what happens once that question gets asked honestly. Dissonance is the discomfort of holding two conflicting truths at the same time. In this case, I am successful, and I am not fulfilled. Festinger found people resolve dissonance in one of two ways. They change the belief, or they change the behavior. High achievers, trained for years to solve problems rather than simply tolerate them, are unusually likely to choose the harder option, changing the behavior, even when the behavior is their entire career. Here's the part that confuses everyone watching from outside. Most people who quit something big agonize over sunk cost, the years already invested, the identity already built around it. Researchers Hal Arks and Catherine Bloomer documented how powerfully sunk cost distorts ordinary decision-making, pulling people to keep going simply because they've already spent so much time and effort. High achievers show this bias far less than most. Their decision runs almost entirely on where the path leads next, not on what it already cost them to get here. That's not coldness. It's a different relationship with the past. Once the internal decision is made, the years already spent stop functioning as an argument for staying and start functioning as evidence the choice was already tested thoroughly. They don't need more time to be sure. They already ran the experiment, for years, in real conditions, and they trust the result. Self-determination theory, developed by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, adds another piece to this picture. Their research identifies autonomy, the sense of acting from your own genuine choice rather than external control, as one of three basic psychological needs, alongside competence and connection to others. When autonomy quietly disappears from an achievement, even one that still delivers status and competence, motivation degrades slowly from the inside out. Eventually, the achievement keeps performing well on paper, while the person performing it has already left in every way that matters. Psychologist Jack Brem's work on reactance adds a sharper edge here. Reactance is the pushback that appears when a person senses their freedom being narrowed, even by success itself, by golden handcuffs, expectations, and a role that quietly stopped being optional. For most people, that pressure builds slowly and gets absorbed. For high achievers, who value autonomy intensely precisely because they've earned so much of it elsewhere. Reactance against a controlling structure can eventually outweigh every reward the structure still offers. There's also a neurological piece to this that researchers studying reward circuitry have documented consistently. Dopamine, the brain's signal for motivation and drive, surges most strongly during the pursuit of a goal, not in the moment it's finally achieved. That surge is what makes chasing something feel electric. Once the goal is banked, the signal drops off sharply, and the brain starts scanning for the next target almost immediately. For most people, that scan lands on a new external goal. For a high achiever who has already run this loop many times, the scan sometimes lands somewhere else entirely, on the question of whether the chase itself was ever really the point. This explains why the walk away, when it finally comes, looks so calm. It isn't calm because the person doesn't care. It's calm because the emotional work already happened, privately, over a long stretch of time nobody else witnessed. By the time they say the words out loud, they've already grieved the version of themselves who might have stayed, and there's genuinely nothing left to process in front of an audience. Psychologist Bloomer Zegonic found that unfinished tasks stay lodged in memory far longer than completed ones, intruding repeatedly on attention until they are resolved. High achievers who walk away tend to complete the task internally before they ever complete it externally. They finish the thinking, close the open loop in their own mind first, and only then take the outward step. That's why there's so little rumination afterward. The pool of the unfinished loop was already satisfied long before anyone else knew a decision even existed. Carl Rogers wrote about what he called an internal locus of evaluation, the capacity to judge your own choices by your own standards instead of outsourcing that judgment to an audience. People with a strong internal locus don't need everyone around them to understand the decision before they can trust it. This is exactly why the explanations often come later, if they come at all. Approval was never the requirement for the decision itself. It was optional, and on some level, they already knew that going in. None of this means the people left behind experience it kindly. Colleagues describe shock. Family sometimes describes something closer to betrayal. From the outside, a calm, sudden exit reads as cold, almost rehearsed, because there's no visible struggle left to point to as proof that it was hard. But the absence of visible struggle isn't the absence of struggle. It's evidence the struggle already finished somewhere private, long before the decision became anyone else's business to react to. There's a specific kind of clean break this produces, different from the messy exits driven by burnout or open conflict. Burnout departures often arrive with resentment, a final blow-up, a felt need to explain exactly why everything became unbearable. The high achiever's exit rarely carries that same charge. There's little left to burn, because the fire already happened quietly, over months or years, inside a mind that had already made peace with leaving long before it ever announced anything. What looks like a sudden ending is usually just a last visible step of a much longer process, one that was invisible, deliberate, and already resolved well before you noticed it happening at all. There's a version of this you might recognize even if your version was smaller. A friendship you stopped chasing. A job you turned down after everyone told you it was the obvious move. A relationship you ended calmly, without the argument people expected. The scale is different, but the mechanism is the same one Sheldon, Festinger, Deci, Ryan, and the rest of this research describes. A quiet, internal reckoning that finishes long before anyone else gets to see it happen. If you've ever walked away from something everyone else thought you should have kept, the discomfort other people felt watching you do it was never really about you. It was about how little of the actual process they were ever shown. And if you're in the middle of that process right now, still deciding, still running the numbers privately, that's not indecision. That's the work. It's meant to happen quietly, before it happens out loud.